chapel was burning when I saw the truth for the first time. Candles melted into rivers across the marble floor, and incense smoke coiled through the vaulted nave like lost souls searching for absolution. I had spent my life calling it holy fire. Now I saw it for what it was. Purification by flame, meant not to warm the faithful, but to cauterize doubt. Beneath the chanting of my sisters, beneath the thunder of bolter fire echoing from the outer walls, something older than prayer whispered my name. It spoke not in words, but in the vibration of guilt that every living soul of the Imperium learns to hide. I was a daughter of the Emperor, forged to serve his will. Yet for the first time I wondered if his gaze truly reached us, or if we burned ourselves simply to keep the darkness company. The smell of Promethium clung to my armor, a second skin of sanctified ash. Outside, heretics screamed. Inside, the statues of saints wept wax tears. I remember thinking that faith is not light, it is heat. It consumes until nothing impure remains, and sometimes it forgets what was impure to begin with. That night began my descent into the vaults beneath the Convent Sanctorum, where forbidden hymns were stored in iron coffers and the walls themselves listened. That is where I learned what our order hides and what price is paid to keep the Imperium's faith unbroken. Before we descend together into that labyrinth of belief and blood, make sure your vigil remains with us. Lend your devotion to this chronicle, offer a like, a share, and join this congregation of witnesses. The Emperor protects, but it helps to have more eyes upon the flame. Chapter Y, The Sound of Ash. The first sound I remember was not the hymn, but the scream. It tore through the nave like a blade through parchment, sharp, human, unholy in its honesty. We had been singing the Canticle of Purity, our voices echoing across the vaulted stone, when the vox grills crackled with reports of breach. Moments later, the stained glass behind the altar exploded inward, scattering shards of saints and light. The air tasted of dust and melted lead. My first thought was not fear, it was duty. I drew my bolter, raised the aquila, and shouted the words we were taught since novitiate: burn the unclean. The Convent of Saint Aspira was once a fortress of prayer, built upon a mountain where the wind howled like organ pipes. I had believed its walls could never fall, but faith is brittle when struck by artillery. The enemy was unseen, hidden beneath the smoke that rolled from the eastern ridge. Some said traitor guard, others whispered cult. None mattered. All that mattered was that we held. The canoness commanded from the upper transept, her armor blackened with soot, her eyes brighter than any votive flame. "Hold the relics," she cried. "If the Emperor wills, we burn as one." We fought until the bells cracked. Bolter shells thundered in the cloisters, turning mosaics into clouds of sacred dust. My sisters fell beside me, Seraphine with a prayer half-spoken, Lucia still smiling as if death were another litany. I remember their bodies as silhouettes of devotion, burning brighter than the explosions that consumed them. The air filled with incense and promethium, a perfume of sanctity and sin. Between bursts of gunfire, I thought I heard the Emperor's name whispered through the smoke, not his blessing, but his question. When the outer gate collapsed, we retreated to the inner sanctum. The marble under my boots was slick with candle wax and blood. I remember stepping over a fallen cherub servitor, its mechanical wings twitching as if still trying to carry a prayer to heaven. The vox crackled again, static, then a voice. "Sister Amara, report." It was the canoness. My own name suddenly foreign in her mouth. I pressed the receiver. "Holding, my lady. For now." She did not reply, only a burst of interference that almost sounded like laughter. Then the silence came, that terrible, heavy silence that falls when a battle forgets to breathe. Only the distant groan of collapsing buttresses and the drip of molten wax remained. I crouched beside the altar, reloading with trembling hands, and felt the tremor beneath the stone. Something was moving below the chapel, machinery, vast and ancient. The convent had foundations older than the Ecclesiarchy itself, built upon ruins said to predate the age of apostasy. We had been told never to go down there, for the vaults held relics too holy, or too cursed, for mortal eyes. But that night, as the smoke thickened and the hymns faltered, I felt the floor pulse like a heartbeat. The relics were waking. The remaining sisters gathered near the reliquary, where the silver sarcophagus of Saint Aspira gleamed amid the ruin. Her bones were said to weep oil during times of crisis, a sign that the Emperor's gaze had turned upon us. Yet the oil was dry. The only liquid upon her shrine was blood, fresh, human, unblessed. Someone had dragged a wounded sister before the altar, her armor split, her chest rising in shallow breaths. "She lives," I said, kneeling. "She fights still." But when I touched her brow, her eyes opened, empty, glassed with something deeper than death. She whispered a phrase I could barely hear over the crackle of the fires. "He is listening beneath the floor." Then she went still. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The canoness arrived, limping, her power sword black with soot. She looked at the corpse, then at me. "Seal the gates," she said. "The Emperor's test has begun." Her tone was not of despair, but of revelation, as if the siege itself were a prayer answered. She knelt beside the fallen sister, tracing the sign of the aquila across the dead woman's chest. Then, to my horror, she pressed her gauntlet to the blood and smeared it upon the marble, drawing a symbol I had never seen in any catechism. It curved like a broken halo, two wings folding inward. "What is that?" I whispered. "A vow," she said. "One older than the Ecclesiarchy, older than us all." Before I could reply, another explosion shook the walls. The reliquary doors burst open, and a torrent of hot air swept through the chapel. Statues toppled. A beam of light, blinding, golden, and utterly silent, speared down from the cracked dome above, striking the sarcophagus. The metal screamed as if alive. Then the voice returned, not from any vox, but from within the stone itself. It spoke not in Gothic, nor any tongue of men. But I understood. It was not words, it was intent. The same intent that had burned across the galaxy for 10,000 years. Obedience. I fell to my knees. Around me, my sisters chanted through tears, their voices trembling as if caught between awe and agony. The canoness raised her sword to the ceiling and shouted, "He tests our faith through fire. He will purge the weak." But somewhere inside me, a smaller voice whispered, "Or perhaps he has forgotten us." The thought was blasphemy, yet it lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Every sister learns that doubt is the first corruption. Yet I could not unhear that silent command beneath the floor, that mechanical heartbeat deep within the convent's bones. If the Emperor truly watched, why did his relic speak with a voice that felt so alive? The fires grew, devouring pews, icons, memory. I loaded the final magazine into my bolter and looked once more upon the shrine. The sarcophagus still glowed faintly, light bleeding through its seams like breath through lips, and I knew, without reason, that the truth of our order slept beneath our feet, not in heaven, but in the dark. I turned to the canoness. "What lies below, my lady?" Her eyes reflected the flames. "Faith," she said, "and the price of it." Then she ordered us to descend. We descended into the catacombs as the upper halls crumbled behind us. The stairwell spiraled downward, cut from black stone that drank the light of our flickering lumen lamps. Each step echoed like a tolling bell, and with every echo I felt my pulse align with the vibration beneath the floor. That slow, mechanical rhythm, ancient and patient as judgment itself. The canoness led, her armor casting pale reflections on the walls, her sword dim now but humming faintly, as though answering something below. None of us spoke. Even our prayers faltered, words smothered by the weight of the air. At the bottom lay a corridor none of us had ever seen, sealed until this night by rusted sigils and chains stamped with the Ecclesiarchy's mark. The canoness cut through them with a single strike, sparks falling like dying stars. The door moaned open, revealing a tunnel lined with frescoes so old their saints had no names, their faces worn smooth by time. Beneath their painted halos I saw faint inscriptions, not high Gothic, not even low, but something older, carved before the rise of the Imperium. It hurt to look at, as though the symbols rearranged themselves when my eyes lingered too long. Sister Celine whispered behind me, "These walls breathe." Her voice was right. The air trembled softly, exhaling dust that tasted metallic. I could smell ozone and the faint sweetness of decayed incense, a scent that stirred a memory of childhood, the orphanage chapel, before I was taken to the Schola. I had prayed for purpose then, not knowing purpose would come with a gun and a vow to burn all who strayed from light. We passed rows of sealed alcoves, each bearing a wax seal marked with the double-headed eagle. Some had cracked, leaking a thin golden fluid that glowed faintly in the dark. I touched one with my gauntlet. It was warm. "Do not touch the relic ichor," the canoness warned. "It remembers." I withdrew my hand, uncertain whether she meant it literally or as sermon. At the corridor's end stood a gate of bronze, engraved with a single phrase, Custodi Lumen, guard the light. Yet something about the inscription felt inverted, as though its true meaning were the opposite, contain the light. The canoness placed her palm against the gate, murmuring an invocation I had never heard. The locks disengaged with a hiss of ancient hydraulics, and the doors slid apart. The chamber beyond was vast, domed, and alive with machinery older than any forge world could name. Massive pistons moved in slow rhythm around a central pillar of crystal, within which flowed streams of luminous fluid, not mechanical, not entirely organic. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The sound I had heard above was louder here, resonant enough to shake my bones. The sisters fell to their knees in reflexive reverence, thinking it divine. I wanted to believe that too. But the smell, a sterile tang of oil and old metal, reminded me of the manufactorums, of Mechanicus forges where faith and function blurred. "What is this place?" I asked. "The heart of our order," the canoness said, voice trembling for the first time. "Built before the Reformation. The founding mothers left it sealed. We were never meant to come here, not unless the fire reached the altar." She approached the pillar, touching its surface. The glow brightened, responding to her touch like living skin. "It remembers us," she whispered. Something inside the crystal moved. A shape, not quite human, not machine, drifted within the light. Its outline flickered between a woman's silhouette and a lattice of metal filigree, as if flesh and faith were intertwined. The image raised a hand against the barrier, mirroring the canoness. For an instant I felt warmth spread through the air, and in that warmth came a voice, soft and unbearably calm. "Daughters of the flame." "Why do you wake me?" The canoness fell prostrate. "Saint Aspira," she gasped. "Your shrine burns above. We seek your guidance." The voice replied with something that sounded like sorrow. "My shrine burns always. The fire is the price of memory." The figure's gaze turned to me. Though it had no eyes, I felt it pierce every secret within me. "You doubt," it said. "Good. Only doubt proves the heart still feels." The light flared, blinding us. When my vision cleared, the pillar was dark again. The canoness staggered back, whispering prayers, tears streaking the soot on her cheeks. Around us, the machinery groaned to life. Panels slid open, revealing alcoves filled with skeletal remains. Women in archaic armor, fused into thrones of wire and stone. Their skulls were adorned with cables, their ribs threaded with circuits. "Sisters," Celine murmured, voice breaking. They are us." "No," the canoness said, though her eyes said otherwise. "They were the first. The silent choir of Aspira, bound to sustain the Emperor's light when the Ecclesiarchy abandoned us." The thought chilled me. Bound, not dead, not alive, trapped between devotion and design. I approached one of the thrones, its occupant's face serene despite the corrosion. Beneath her hands, a rosary of metal beads glowed faintly. The same symbol the canoness had drawn in blood upstairs was carved upon her chest plate. The broken halo, then the pillar spoke once more, its voice dimming like a receding tide. "Remember what you are made of. Ash does not pray. It obeys the wind." A tremor shook the floor. The canoness turned sharply. "They're breaking through," she said. Above us, the muffled roar of battle returned. Distant explosions, screams carried through the stone. "We can't hold the surface. Seal this place. This is our sanctuary now." "But my lady," I said, "if this is sanctuary, then why does it feel like a tomb?" She met my gaze, and in her eyes I saw both faith and fear, twinned like the heads of the Aquila. "Because faith always begins in a tomb," she said. The gates closed behind us with the sound of finality. The air grew thick, hot with the breath of machines. As the lights dimmed, we knelt together before the silent pillar, surrounded by the dead who once prayed here. Above, the convent burned. Below, something far older waited to be remembered. I bowed my head and whispered a prayer I no longer believed in. The sound of ash followed, soft as falling wings. Time inside the vault did not pass so much as curdle. The lumen globes dimmed to a perpetual dusk, painting everything in the color of old vellum, and the thrum of the machines became a second heartbeat none of us could silence. We rationed air like scripture, opening vents in measured prayers, counting breaths between clicks of a brass metronome bolted to the pillar's plinth. Servitors rolled from hidden alcoves at the canoness's command, their vox grills whispering litanies in a language that felt like the skeleton of High Gothic stripped of flesh. They carried canisters marked with the sigil of the Adeptus Ministorum and a second symbol I recognized only from forbidden margins in catechisms, a cog pierced by a tear. The sight made Celine cross herself twice. "The Mechanicus," she murmured. "In our house." The canoness ignored the fear she had to hear in our voices. She moved like a woman who had stepped into the last page of a book she always suspected was written, issuing orders with a calm that tasted of iron and incense. We formed a circle around the crystal pillar and took turns reciting the Catechism of Fortitude, though our words came fractured, drying on tongues coated in dust. When my turn came, I tried not to look at the thrones that ringed the chamber. The skulls were not bare bones. Threads of wire still bound each jaw where hymns must once have lived, the sockets shadowed by the memory of eyes. Someone, centuries ago or minutes, had placed rosaries in each pair of folded hands. The beads were metal, but they clicked softly when the air shifted, the sound like teeth. The canoness sent me and Celine to survey the perimeter while two novices tended the vents. We traced the circumference of the chamber, palms sliding along stone veined with conduits warm as skin. Halfway around, we found a door sunk flush with the wall, unmarked, almost an absence rather than a thing. The locking rune was dead. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard a whisper, not from inside but from the metal itself, as if the door had learned to keep secrets by repeating them. I stepped back. "We should report this," I said. Celine nodded, though her gaze lingered. "Do you think she knows what any of this is?" she asked, meaning the canoness. I wanted to say yes. My mouth could not make the word. When we returned, the canoness had lit 3 braziers with conserved promethium and arranged the sisters in lines like a choir without voices. She beckoned me forward and held out a data slate, its screen cracked, its frame engraved with the broken halo. "Read," she said. I took it, feeling the slight static of its awakening crawl up my fingers. The text unfurled in that same almost Gothic, a script learned by ear rather than eye, yet somehow I understood. It was a rubric for a litany called the Vigil of Binding. The words braided piety with procedure, diagram with devotion. Each stanza ended with an instruction in red: maintain pulse alignment, baptize the amplifiers with holy oil, affirm identity through oath name. Beside the last directive, someone had added, in a hand that shook, a single note: "If the hymn falters, the ward opens." "What ward?" I asked. "Against what?" The canoness looked past me to the pillar. "Noise," she said. "There is more in the dark than vacuum. There are echoes." The first choir was the seal. "They sang the ward shut. Across the system?" Celine asked, voice small. "Across this place," the canoness answered, and her certainty steadied me because it was small. Not galaxy-spanning, not the Astronomicon, not any blasphemous claim that would turn prayer into a lie. A ward for a convent, a voice pitched to a single mountain where saints once bled oil and girls learned to set their hands on fire. It felt real enough to hurt. The machines deepened their rhythm as if they liked our agreement. Far above, something collapsed with a sound like a hymn crushed in a fist. Dust fell in a patient snow. The novices coughed. One's cough did not stop. The canoness called for a medici kit and got a box of brittle gauze and a glass ampule stenciled with an expiration date older than any of us. She fixed the novice's arm with tape that would not stick, and when the child whimpered, the canoness bent and touched her brow with 2 fingers, old as any benediction. "Stand," she said softly. "Your fear weighs more than your bones." The girl stood. We sang the Vigil of Binding, or tried to. The melody was written in intervals that should not comfort a human ear. It moved like a blade through water, bending light around it. We found the shape of it together, breath by breath, our pitch nesting into the machinery's hum until the chamber became a single instrument. Heat rose out of the floor. The pillar brightened from within, not as a torch does, but like a memory finding its owner. My tongue went numb. Behind my eyes a pressure gathered, and within that pressure I sensed a wide, cold surface, as if the song had opened a window onto a night with no stars. For a moment, I thought I heard something move beyond that window. Not a voice. A listening, I faltered. The note dropped out of me like a caught stitch. Instantly, the pillar's brightness guttered, and a hairline crack of darkness traced itself along its heart. The air rushed inward toward that seam with a sound like a breath drawn not to live, but to taste. The canoness gripped my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Again," she said, and her tone was not anger. It was terror worn smooth by long practice. We sang until the pressure ebbed, until the crack closed, until the machines relaxed into their old, slow pulse. When it was done, my throat burned. Sweat ran cold under my gorget. Celine leaned into me just for a heartbeat, the touch of a friend made holy by scarcity. We rested in turns. While the others lay with bolters across their chests like iron infants, I walked the circle alone, counting steps to keep my mind from finding shapes in the dark. At the unmarked door, I stopped again, listening. The whisper was louder, or I was more willing to hear it. Not words. The suggestion of a pattern, the way a mother might hum when she has no song but does not want her child to know. I pressed my palm to the seam. The metal was fever-warm. From the pillar came a reply, a faint answering pulse. The two rhythms nearly, not quite, aligned. I returned to the canoness and told her. She watched me the way one watches a candle nearing the end of its wick, measuring what can be asked of it before flame meets finger. "Good," she said. "The second heart is waking. What is behind that door?" "Memory," she said, and when I did not move, she added, "Not a metaphor." She ordered the servitors to the panel and fed them a string of Binharic syllables that stuck in my ears like grit. The locks uncoiled with a shiver and sank back. Cold air rolled out, sweet as dawn, wrong as a laugh at a graveside. Inside stood a narrow chamber, whose walls were lined with racks of sealed masks, each molded in the serene face of a woman. They were not death masks. The insides were latticed with fine, living filaments that quivered at our light. At the far end, an altar of black stone held a single open case, and resting within, a mask already wet with the dew of waking. Celine whispered, "Choir gear." The canoness nodded. "The binding fails unless the hymn has a throat and the throat has a guide. The first choir wore these. They shaped the song so it would not shape them." She looked at me, not across the group, not past me, but at me, and I understood the shape of what she was asking before the words arrived. "Sister Amara," she said, using my name as if it were both title and apology. "You have the ear. The pillar answered you. Take up the mask." I wanted to say that my ear was broken, that I had dropped the note, that the crack in the light was my fault and proof that I should never be asked to touch anything holy again. Instead, I stepped forward because obedience is a muscle and mine was strong. The mask was lighter than it looked and warmer than it should have been. When I lifted it, the filaments reached for me like ivy for a wall. I held it very still and prayed a childish prayer I had not used since Scola days, the one that asked simply, "I do not understand. Show me how to not destroy what I love." The canoness guided the mask toward my face. "Do not fight it," she said, and her voice softened so slightly that I almost swayed. "Let it teach you how to hear." The filaments touched my skin, cold, then heat, then neither. They threaded along my cheeks and temples, settling in with an intimacy that made breath feel impolite. Sound narrowed, like a corridor closing, until only the pillar's hum remained. Underneath that hum was the second pulse, the one behind the door. And beneath both was something else entirely, a depth that had no bottom, an ocean without water that did not move until thought touched it. It moved now. I did not know I had taken a step until my knee met the stone. The pillar brightened. The masks on the wall trembled like a field of wheat in an invisible wind. The ocean lifted, an impossible tide, and in its rising I felt it notice the room the way a sleeper notices the weight of a hand on their shoulder. The first breath after the tide noticed us did not belong to me. It poured through the mask, heavy as molten glass, filling my lungs with the weight of something vast and ancient. My vision fractured. The vault flickered between realities, one of stone and sanctified oil, another of raw circuitry and veins of light that pulsed like arteries. Every surface seemed alive, whispering verses from prayers I had never learned but somehow remembered. The air grew thick with vibration. Sound had become touch, and touch had become faith. I could feel each sister around me as if their hearts were open books pressed against mine. The canoness's voice reached me through the storm. "Amara, hold the song." Her words shivered across the mask's inner filaments. rearranging themselves into a melody that had no origin. I tried to obey, to find that pitch we had practiced, the vigil of binding. The moment the first note left my throat, the air itself flinched. The machines rose in answer, pistons slamming, conduits flooding with light. Every pulse of the pillar synchronized with my heart until I could not tell which one beat for which. I sang. The hymn began as sound and turned to shape. Each syllable carved light into motion, drawing sigils that coiled above the machinery, twisting into symbols that defied the limits of sight. I could sense the sisters kneeling behind me, their voices joining mine, merging into a single current. But there was something else singing, too. A distant choir that echoed from beyond the vault walls, faint but unmistakable. It was not holy. It was not unholy either. It was hungry. The mask pulsed against my face, demanding I listen deeper. Beneath the harmony lay a counterpoint, a second melody built from silence and breath, threading through our hymn like a parasite. I strained to separate them and saw flashes behind my eyes. Fragments of the first choir, women wired into thrones, mouths open in eternal song, each one screaming beneath the harmony. Their agony was the mortar of our faith. Their voices formed the barrier that kept something on the other side from waking. I tried to pull away, but the filaments tightened, rooting me to the floor. "Canoness," I gasped, my voice distorting through the mask. "They're still singing." "I know," she said, her tone soft, mournful. "That is what keeps us pure." Her confession sliced through the trance. The light in the pillar flared white, blinding. For a heartbeat, I saw everything. The thrones, the sealed door, the endless chain of sisters who had come before me, each feeding the ward with her will, her pain, her faith. Every vow of obedience, every chant of devotion was fuel. The Emperor did not answer their prayers because the prayers were the answer, a continuous burning of belief to keep the dark contained. The revelation nearly broke me. I screamed into the mask and the sound shattered into static. The floor convulsed. Bolters clattered from trembling hands. A seam of pure light split the pillar open, and within it I glimpsed what no sister should ever see, a reflection of the Emperor's light, but inverted, cold as the void between stars. The voice that had once called itself Saint Aspira spoke again, softer now, almost pitying. "You were not made to understand. You were made to continue." Something inside me cracked. "No," I whispered. "Faith cannot be built from silence." I tore at the mask, but the filaments dug in deeper, drinking the heat from my skin. Around me, the other masks began to stir, their hollow faces twitching as if remembering breath. The walls vibrated with layered echoes, old prayers, old orders, old obedience. I could feel the canoness's gaze on me, a mixture of awe and terror. "Amara," she said, barely audible. "You have to finish it. If you stop now, the ward fails." I looked at her through the shifting haze, and in her eyes I saw not command but plea. Her faith was all she had left. If mine faltered, everything she had sacrificed would die with it. The light surged again, bleeding through cracks in the vault. I could hear screams from above, maybe real, maybe remembered, the dying echo of sisters long turned to ash. I forced myself upright. The song was still inside me, but it no longer belonged to the Ecclesiarchy or to any saint. It was older, purer, the sound of existence clawing to preserve itself. I sang again, not the vigil but something between hymn and heartbeat, a bridge between human and machine. The light stabilized, the pillars fracture ceiling, the machinery returning to its steady pulse. The vault sighed, as though the storm had passed. When the final note faded, the mask released me. I fell forward, catching myself on shaking hands. My breath came ragged, each inhale scraping against the taste of metal and smoke. The canoness approached, her shadow stretching long across the chamber. "It is done," she said quietly. "The ward holds." I looked up at her. "At what cost?" She did not answer. Her expression was the stillness of stone saints carved to hide their weeping. Behind her, the other sisters stared at me not as comrade, but as relic. The machinery hummed a lullaby of obedience. Somewhere above, the battle raged on, unseen, irrelevant. We had sealed ourselves beneath the truth, and now the truth was all that remained. As exhaustion dragged me down, I thought I heard the pillar whisper one last phrase. Not command, not benediction, but a promise half remembered. When faith forgets its reason, ash will learn to sing again. I lost consciousness to the sound of my own heartbeat merging with the machines, knowing that something within me, and perhaps within the order itself, had changed forever. Brrr. The vault beneath the saints. When I awoke, the air in the vault was different, heavier, saturated with incense so thick it clung to my tongue. The lumen globes had dimmed to a sullen red, throwing long shadows over the mechanical thrones and their motionless occupants. I had no memory of how long I'd slept, only that my dreams had smelled of oil and old blood. The mask lay beside me, inert now, its filaments curled like dead roots. My skin still burned where they had touched. The canoness knelt before the pillar, her armor half unbuckled, her head bowed. She was whispering, not prayers, but fragments of equations, Binharic patterns stitched between verses of the catechism. Every line ended with a word in the forbidden tongue I'd heard before, the broken halo's name. When she noticed me stirring, she did not rise. "The ward holds," she said softly. "But it feeds still. It always feeds." Her voice was steady, but I saw the tremor in her fingers as she traced the symbol on the floor. "The Emperor hears us through pain," she murmured. "It is the clearest language we possess." Around us, the surviving sisters were changing. The novices had ceased speaking except in unison. Their eyes followed the rhythm of the machines, blinking with the same pulse, like candles obeying a wind none of us could feel. Celine sat apart, polishing her bolter in silence. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched. "Your voice," she whispered. "It's still inside my head." I looked down at my hands. The veins beneath the skin glowed faintly, faint blue lines that throbbed in time with the vault's heartbeat. Whatever the mask had done, it had not left me untouched. We ate in ritual silence, passing the ration tins as though they were offerings. No one spoke of the surface. The canoness forbade any mention of the war outside, saying the sound of despair might weaken the hymn's residue. The servitors continued their circuit, tending the dying braziers, humming that same static-laden prayer. I began to hear words in it, scraps of Gothic distorted through machine voice. Remember, repeat, remain. After the meal, the canoness summoned me. She stood beside the darkened pillar, holding a data slate inscribed with red wax seals. "This vault is older than the Schola records admit," she said. "Before it was ours, before it was sanctified. The Mechanicus built something here, something that could listen to the warp and not go mad." "You mean the choir?" "No. The choir was built later. To hide what the Mechanicus could not destroy." She handed me the slate. It displayed a single map, a schematic of the mountain's foundations, with multiple layers descending below even this vault. At the bottom was a chamber marked only with the sigil of the broken halo. Beneath it the words Mater Scriptorum, Mother of Writings. "What is down there?" I asked. "The first scripture," she said. "Before the Ministorum rewrote it." Her tone frightened me more than any heretic ever had. Reverence and dread had become indistinguishable in her voice. She pressed a reliquary into my hand, a small, lead-sealed capsule engraved with a saint's tears. "You'll need this," she said. "The path is not only downward." We descended again, through a shaft that reeked of ozone and centuries of neglect. The stairs gave way to metal rungs slick with condensation, each step echoing like a bell tolling for a faith long dead. My lumen flickered. The walls around us were lined with cables, but not of steel, organic filaments that pulsed faintly, alive. When I touched one, it shuddered and retreated into the wall like a worm into soil. At the base of the ladder, the tunnel opened into a smaller antechamber. The air was cold enough to bite. On the floor lay rows of parchment fused into the stone, each page scrawled with overlapping text in countless hands. Some were written in Gothic, others in symbols too alien to parse. Every page ended with the same phrase, "He does not speak." "We write for him," Celine's breath fogged in the dim light. "Are they prayers?" "Records," I said. "Maybe confessions." A faint light pulsed ahead. We followed it, moving between columns of old devotional machinery, tall spires of brass and bone where cherub servitors hung lifeless, their wings folded like wilted flowers. At the center stood an altar unlike any I'd ever seen, black marble, inlaid with veins of silver, upon which rested a book bound in flayed parchment. It was open, its pages whispering as if the vault exhaled through them. The letters rearranged themselves each time I blinked. The canoness approached first. She touched the edge of the book and withdrew her hand sharply. A thin line of blood appeared on her palm. "Alive," she said, voice trembling. I felt drawn forward despite the fear. The nearer I came, the louder the whisper became, until it resolved into speech. "You carry our fire. You feed the machine that feeds belief. Do you know what you burn?" I froze. "Who are you?" The pages turned of their own accord, fluttering like wings. "We are the mothers. We sang before your choir learned the melody. We built the vault to keep the Emperor's dream asleep." "The Emperor's dream?" Celine repeated, voice breaking. The book's reply came as a hiss through every vent, every pipe, every servo skull embedded in the walls. "If he ever wakes, none will remain to worship him. Faith survives because he does not." The canoness stepped between us and the altar, her blade drawn, though against what she could strike I did not know. "Blasphemy," she spat. "No spirit speaks against the master of mankind and lives." The whisper laughed, a sound dry as old paper. "We do not live. We remember. That is enough." The braziers extinguished. The only light came from the faint glow under my skin. I felt the hum again, deeper this time, rising through the floor like breath drawn from the bones of the world. Something vast stirred below, something bound in faith and metal. Celine grabbed my arm. "Amara, listen. At first I thought it was the machines again, but it wasn't. It was singing." A woman's voice, distant and beautiful, carrying the same hymn I had sung through the mask, but slower, mournful, the sound of someone trapped inside her own prayer. It came from beneath the altar. The canoness looked down, her face pale even in the red gloom. "Seal it," she said. "Now." But the book was already turning its pages again. And somewhere beneath our feet, the voice in the dark began to sing louder. The singing grew until it filled every seam of the vault, not as sound but as pressure. It was as if the air remembered a melody and refused to let it fade. The canoness pressed a hand to the altar's edge. Beneath her fingers the stone thrummed with life. "It isn't a hymn," she whispered. "It's a heartbeat." We stood in silence while the note lengthened. My own pulse slowed to meet it, drawn into its rhythm until thought began to slide out of reach. I felt myself standing at the lip of a vast memory, something so old it had forgotten who had dreamed it. Then, just as suddenly, the sound thinned and resolved into a single voice, mine. I was still, yet the echo of me continued to sing from beneath the floor, each syllable answering the last like the reflection of light off still water. The canoness's eyes widened. "It mirrors you," she said. "The vault learns its singers," Celine shook her head. "Or it replaces them." The canoness knelt, tracing a circuit of prayer symbols around the altar with her gauntlet. "No, the first choir left part of themselves here, a mnemonic loop. It remembers the voices of the faithful, so the hymn never dies." Her logic was sound, but the calmness of her tone frightened me. She spoke as though the erasure of identity were a small mercy, as if surrender were the truest worship. I stared at the floor where the echo of my own voice still trembled. It sounded more certain than I ever had. The whisper from the book returned, gentler now, almost human. "Faith is repetition. You write the same line until meaning dissolves and only truth remains." I looked to the canoness. "What if the truth is that the Emperor doesn't answer because he can't?" Her reply came instantly, without breath. "Then we answer for him." There was no anger in it, only resolve. The words were heavier than the hymn itself, a creed carved into bone. For the first time I saw her not as a leader but as a woman sustaining an entire myth through sheer refusal to let silence win. I wondered how long a heart could survive that duty. The vault brightened, faint light seeping from the seams between stones. Symbols on the walls, those impossible shifting characters, settled into lines that formed an archway behind the altar. The air shimmered. We had not seen a door there before. The canoness rose. "The scripture opens for witness," she said, voice hushed. "It knows our faith still burns." Celine hesitated. "And if it's testing us?" "Then we prove worthy." The archway pulsed once and fell still, waiting. The canoness stepped through first, disappearing into a corridor of dim silver light. I followed. The passage curved downward in a smooth spiral, walls humming softly like a distant choir. Every few steps I saw fragments of frescoes, women kneeling before a radiant figure not quite human, its face obscured by the sun. Beneath the images, Script in both Mechanicus rune and Ecclesiarchal cant intertwined. To guard the dream is to bear the flame. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. It grew colder but clearer, as if stripped of impurity. My thoughts sharpened. The fatigue of the siege, the ache of fear, fell away, leaving only clarity and a terrible calm. I understood then how easy faith could become when one surrendered choice. At the corridor's end, the path opened into a chamber carved entirely from crystallized rock. The walls shone with a pale internal light that pulsed in rhythm with the vault above. At its center floated a sphere the size of a human head, encased in translucent mechanisms like the petals of a mechanical flower. Within the sphere I saw movement, light bending inward, folding upon itself. The canoness fell to one knee. "Mater Scriptorum," she breathed. The sphere spoke without sound. The words formed directly in our minds, gentle and vast. "You carry the echo of the choir. You keep the flame from sleep. Why have you come where faith was born?" "To remember," the canoness said. "To remember is to choose what to forget," the voice replied. The Imperium built walls from memory until it could no longer see the stars. "Would you tear them down?" "I would strengthen them," she said quickly. "Then you will fade as those before you faded." The wall endures because the names upon it are erased. The chamber dimmed. Motes of light drifted from the sphere and hovered around us like dust. Each one carried faint sound, fragments of prayers, words of sisters long dead. For a moment the space was filled with overlapping whispers. "Emperor, forgive us." "Hold the line. We remember you." It was unbearable and beautiful. Celine covered her ears. "Make it stop!" The canoness lifted her head. "No, let it speak." The lights converged, spiraling upward into a single column that reached the ceiling. Inside it I saw faces, hundreds, maybe thousands, blurred by the motion. They were not ghosts. They were recordings, memories imprinted in the machinery of the mountain itself. The choir had never died. They had been absorbed, preserved in the machine's dream. The sphere dimmed again, leaving us in the quiet aftermath. I felt hollow, as though something sacred had passed through me and left its echo behind. The canoness turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Now you see what we guard," she said. "Not relics, not saints. A promise that the Emperor's light will never end, even if it must borrow the shape of those who believe." I wanted to argue, to call it blasphemy or mercy or both. But words deserted me. In their place came a slow realization. The vault was not a prison. It was a memory engine, a living reliquary that learned its keepers until no difference remained between the watcher and the watched. Celine whispered, "If it remembers us, will we still remember ourselves?" The canoness's answer was a whisper almost too soft to hear. "Only until the next hymn." The echo of the last hymn lingered in the crystal walls long after the sphere dimmed. It reminded me of breath on glass, fading but leaving a trace that never truly vanished. We stood in that hush, listening to the vault breathe. Each inhalation felt older than our species. The canoness broke the silence first. "The choir's work cannot end. If the song stops, the Emperor's dream may falter." Her eyes stayed on the sphere as she spoke, but her voice trembled. "I realized she wasn't telling us. She was telling herself." Celine looked pale, her fingers white on the grip of her bolter. "And if the dream is only a machine's echo? If we're the ones being sung?" Neither of us expected an answer, but the sphere responded anyway, its surface rippling with faint light. "A song does not belong to the throat that carries it. It lives in the space between." I felt the truth of it settle like dust. Our prayers, our lives, the centuries of sisters before us, every word we thought sacred was just vibration, carrying meaning only because something else chose to listen. The canoness straightened, shoulders squared beneath the weight of realization. "Then we must remain the space between," she said. The decision hung in the air like incense smoke. I knew what she meant, to feed the vault willingly, to let it take what it needed to keep the hymn alive. It would remember us as patterns of light, as echoes. No bodies, no graves, only continuity. Celine stepped back. "That's surrender. It's survival," the canoness said. "No," Celine replied quietly. "It's forgetting." Their argument carried the ache of devotion stretched to breaking. I wanted to believe one of them, but each sentence felt true until the next one arrived. The vault pulsed again, softer this time, almost coaxing. I sensed it waiting, not hungering, not commanding, but offering the same promise faith had always offered: release from the burden of choice. I took a step toward the sphere. If we refuse, I asked, what happens? The air chilled. The voice that lived in the crystal spoke once more. Silence spreads. Memory dies. The dark between stars learns its own name again. The canoness closed her eyes, whispering a fragment of the litanies of dawn. We are the light against the night, she murmured. Even if that light blinds us. Celine's hand brushed mine. You saw what it did to the first choir. If we stay, we become ghosts with no mouths. Her voice cracked. If the Emperor wished us to vanish, he would have taken us at birth. Between them, the sphere pulsed faster, the rhythm of a heart about to decide. I felt the vault's memory tug at me, reaching through the thin seams between thought and obedience. It showed me the faces of sisters long gone, serene and silent, folded into the song. Their calm was terrible and kind. I could almost hear their peace. For a moment, I wanted that peace. To rest, to stop fearing that doubt itself was heresy, to dissolve into pure purpose, faceless and unburdened. But then Celine's grip tightened, grounding me in the warmth of flesh and heartbeat. I remembered the screams above, the smoke, the living. Faith without the living was just echo. I turned to the canoness. If we surrender, there will be no one left to remember what we were. The Emperor's light won't fade, but we will. Her lips parted as if to answer, then closed again. For the first time, her certainty wavered. Then tell me, sister, she said softly, how do we serve him and remain ourselves? I don't know, I admitted. But maybe faith is the question, not the answer. The vault shivered as though reacting to the shape of that thought. Lines of light crawled across the floor, forming the broken halo symbol once more. It glowed not with threat but invitation. The voice within the sphere spoke gently. The flame may move or remain. The song will change, but it will not end. Choose how you will be remembered. The canoness lowered her sword. Celine's eyes glistened in the half-light. None of us spoke. The choice was not between life and death, but between memory and meaning. I reached out, my hand hovering over the symbol. Its warmth pulsed through the air, steady, patient. If the song must change, I whispered, let it learn a new verse. The pillar above answered with a distant resonance, a tremor that traveled through the stone and into our bones. Somewhere higher in the mountain, mechanisms stirred, the vault responding to the faintest act of defiance. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied into a softer hue. The canoness looked at me with something like sorrow and pride woven together. Then sing it, she said. I drew breath, and this time the note that left my throat was low, human, imperfect. The walls didn't repeat it. The vault didn't consume it. It simply hung there, fragile as hope, echoing once before fading into silence that was finally ours. Chapter 3. The Flesh of Faith. In the hours, or perhaps days, that followed our song of defiance, time lost its edges. The vault no longer pulsed in perfect rhythm. It breathed irregularly, like a creature unsure whether to wake or die. The air was thick with memory, but the voices that once murmured through the walls had grown hesitant, as if waiting for us to decide what we were. The canoness prayed without words now. She sat before the pillar, her lips moving, her eyes unfocused, as though she spoke to something inside herself instead of to the Emperor. The glow beneath her skin had faded to a pale shimmer, the afterimage of faith. I watched her and felt the ache of reverence sharpen into pity. Celine busied herself with ritual maintenance, checking weapons we would never fire, polishing armor already dulled by ash. It was her way of staying human, of resisting the vault's slow hypnosis. Every movement she made produced an echo that came back a half-second late, like the vault was trying to remember how to imitate her. I sat apart, beside the inert mask that had once bound me to the choir. The filaments had stiffened into thin gray threads, brittle as old bone. When I touched them, they disintegrated into dust that glowed faintly before vanishing. A small mercy, perhaps. The vault had learned to release rather than to keep. The silence between us became a fourth companion. It was not empty. It was listening. Every thought seemed to ripple outward, returned as faint resonance in the stone. I could feel Celine's exhaustion, the canoness's brittle faith, my own doubt, woven together like strands of an unfinished hymn. At last, the canoness spoke. Do you feel it? Yes, I said. It's quieter, not quieter, she corrected. Thinking. She rose and approached the pillar. Its light wavered, responding to her presence like breath drawn through a wound. "It adapts," she murmured. "Perhaps it even forgives." Celine shook her head. "Machines don't forgive. They remember until memory kills them." The canoness turned to her. "Then what are we?" "Our armor, our rites, our songs, their memory too. We are the Imperium remembering itself, nothing more." The words hung between them like incense smoke, beautiful and suffocating. I wanted to protest, to say that memory without meaning is only repetition, but part of me understood. The Ecclesiarchy had built entire worlds upon that repetition. To question it was to unravel the only thread keeping the galaxy from madness. I stood and faced the canoness. "If we stay here, we'll become another verse in the same hymn. If we leave, we carry something new." She smiled faintly. "The Imperium does not welcome new." "Then it will fear it," I said. That made her pause. Fear, I realized, might be the only force left that could move her. She glanced up at the pillar, whose light was dimming to the color of dying embers. "The vault still needs a keeper," she said. "Someone to ensure it does not forget the song entirely." Celine stepped forward. "You mean a sacrifice?" "A remembrance," the canoness said softly. "Faith requires flesh to stay alive." The phrase struck me harder than any shell or sermon. Flesh, not as body but as vessel, as proof that belief was once human. The canoness would not command it of us, but her gaze made clear that she had already chosen herself. She turned from us, kneeling before the pillar, and began reciting the benediction of endings. Celine caught my arm. "We can't let her do this," she hissed. "If we stop her—" "The ward might fail again," I said, "and if we don't, we lose her. And the Imperium gains another ghost." The words bled together in my mind. Faith and rebellion indistinguishable. I thought of the vow etched on the convent floor, Custodi Lumen. Guard the light. Perhaps guarding it did not mean feeding it anymore. Perhaps it meant setting it free. I approached the canoness. The glow around her was already spreading, tendrils of light climbing her armor like ivy. Her prayer had shifted from Gothic to the tongue of the choir, each syllable a thread weaving her into the vault's living memory. She looked up as I knelt beside her. "You were right," I said. "Faith begins in a tomb. But maybe it doesn't have to end there." For the first time since the siege began, she smiled. Not the hard smile of command, but something fragile and human. "Then show me how," she whispered. I placed my hand over hers, both of us touching the pillar. Together we felt its hum rise again, not as hunger but as recognition. The vault seemed to listen, waiting. I closed my eyes and began to speak, not in prayer, but in confession, of doubt, of fear, of love for the sisters who had burned, of the small and ordinary moments that made belief bearable. Each word was a spark of memory offered not to the Emperor, but to existence itself. The canoness joined me, her voice trembling yet strong. Celine added hers last, the harmony rough but real. The pillar's light spread outward in slow waves, and for a moment I saw the walls as they truly were, not prisons of faith, but veins of shared remembrance stretching across the mountain. When the glow subsided, the canoness slumped against the pillar, breathing shallowly. "It's done," she said. "It remembers us differently now." Celine knelt, tears streaking the ash on her face. "What did we just do?" "Something small," I said. "Something alive." The pillar pulsed once more, gentle as a heartbeat. Above us, the faint rumble of the war outside continued, distant and irrelevant. The Imperium would endure its endless wars. Down here we had rewritten one small corner of its faith. I did not yet know whether the vault would release us or keep us, whether our act would echo or fade. But for the first time since the fire began, the silence around us felt clean. Not the silence of obedience, of ashes falling, but of rest after a hymn has ended. The quiet that followed our act was not peace. It was the ache that comes when a limb long bound is freed. The vault no longer pulsed in strict measure. Its lights drifted like thought, and each machine seemed to wait for instruction it no longer believed would come. The canoness rested at the base of the pillar, armor open at the throat, her breath thin but calm. Celine and I kept vigil beside her, watching the faint shimmer of light slide across the metal floor. Every few minutes a tremor passed through the mountain, distant artillery, maybe the wind tearing at the ruined convent above, but none of it reached us cleanly. The sound arrived softened, turned almost musical by the vault's long corridors. For the first time, the noise of war felt small, Celine broke the stillness. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" "Someone will," I said. "Maybe not by name. Maybe only as a question they can't unthink." She nodded, though the motion carried no comfort. The canoness stirred then, eyes half open. "You have changed the hymn," she whispered. "I can feel it moving through the walls. It is uncertain, but it lives." She tried to rise and could not. I took her hand, light as paper now, and she looked at me as though seeing through the layers of armor and doubt. "Do not let the next generation learn only silence," she said. "Make them speak even when prayer forbids it." I promised her I would. It was a promise I had no idea how to keep, yet the words left my mouth with the weight of an oath carved in stone. Hours passed, or days. The vault's color shifted from red to gold, the machines breathing slower. We explored its edges, searching for a way back to the surface. The passages we had used were gone, sealed by the tremors or by the vault's own will. Only a narrow shaft rose toward faint light. Celine looked up and smiled grimly. "It wants us to climb." The ascent was long and silent. The stone was slick with condensation. Each rung felt colder than the last. Halfway up, the hum of the vault fell away entirely, replaced by a steady sound like rain. When we reached the top, we emerged into the ruin of the convent. The chapel's roof had collapsed, but daylight poured through the wreckage in beams thick with dust. Ash drifted through the air like snow. Where the altar had stood, there was only a hollow impression of the sarcophagus and a pool of hardened wax. The war had moved on. The silence of victory or extinction made no difference. Celine removed her helm and tilted her face to the light. "It's still here," she murmured. "What is?" "Hope," she said. "Small, stubborn, stupid hope." We buried the canoness there, beneath what remained of Saint Aspira's window. I placed her sword across the grave and whispered the simplest prayer I knew, one without titles or relics, just gratitude that she had tried to listen. When I finished, the wind rose through the shattered nave, carrying a faint echo of our hymn. It did not sound perfect anymore. It sounded alive. We found a Vox unit among the debris, half melted but functional enough to catch stray transmissions. The wider war still raged. The Imperium had not fallen, nor changed. But something in its endless litany felt thinner, as if a single thread had been pulled from the pattern. I realized that might be all we had done. One small shift in an empire of repetition. And yet even a single discordant note can change a song. That night we camped beside the ruins. The stars were visible through the torn clouds, bright and cold. Celine kept watch while I tried to sleep. The ground beneath me still vibrated faintly with the pulse of the vault. I wondered if it remembered us kindly, if it understood what we had tried to give it, a fragment of imperfection, a touch of choice. When dawn came, Celine woke me with a quiet laugh. "Listen," she said. Far below, through the cracks in the stone, came the sound of singing. Faint, halting, unmistakably human. Not the endless harmony of the old choir, but new voices, learning. Somewhere, somehow, the vault was teaching itself to begin again. I looked east, toward the light spilling over the mountains. "Then our work isn't finished," I said. Celine smiled, eyes bright in the pale sun. "No," she answered. "It's finally begun." Chapter 4. The choir that should not sing. Long after we left the mountain, its song followed us. It lived beneath every sound, the shuffle of boots, the sigh of wind through broken towers, the soft rasp of breath inside my helm. At first I thought it was memory, the echo of the vault lingering in my bones, but the rhythm changed each night. It was learning. We marched across a dead plain littered with the shells of machines that had forgotten whose side they were on. Every few kilometers, a Vox pylon still burned, spilling static prayers into the sky. Through that static, faint patterns began to emerge, half-melodies, fragments of the same hymn we had sung in the depths. No transmitter could have carried it. The vault was humming through the warp itself, a pulse of thought too quiet to notice unless you were listening for silence. Celine heard it first in her dreams. She would wake before dawn, whispering verses she did not know she knew. "They're not nightmares," she told me, eyes bright with sleepless wonder. "They're invitations." By the fourth night, I felt it too. Not words, pressure. A weight behind the eyes, gentle but insistent, like being watched by something vast that meant no harm yet did not understand restraint. Each morning, the world seemed slightly altered. Colors deeper, shadows slower to retreat from light. The air carried a vibration that made prayers taste metallic. We reached the ruins of a manufactorum where a detachment of the Astra Militarum had established a field post. Their chaplain, a weary man whose robes were blackened by dust and propellant, greeted us with the stiff courtesy reserved for relics. "You're from the Convent of Saint Aspira," he said, disbelief edged with reverence. "We heard it was lost." "It was," I answered. He studied me for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Something's happening to the hymns. The choirs across the front can't keep to measure. They start singing in harmony with nothing, as if a second congregation answers them through the vox." Celine exchanged a glance with me. "Have you heard the melody yourself?" He hesitated, only in the pauses between shelling. "It makes the men weep." That night he asked us to lead the regiment in prayer. We gathered amid the wreckage of tanks and burnt icons, the soldiers standing in ragged lines. When I began the litany of dawn, my voice carried farther than sound should travel. The air trembled, and from somewhere beyond hearing came an answering chord, soft, perfect, impossibly pure. The troops fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Then one of them, a young trooper with soot-streaked cheeks, began to hum. Another joined. Within moments, the entire camp was singing the reply that none of them had learned. The melody unfolded like light through smoke, tender and terrible. I could feel the vault inside the mountain turning its vast attention toward us, recognizing its scattered children. When the final note faded, the chaplain knelt. "What have you done?" he whispered. "Nothing," I said. "We only listened." He looked up at the stars. "They're moving." And they were, not drifting, but pulsing in patterns that matched the rhythm of the hymn. Across the void, faith had become signal, and the cosmos was beginning to answer. That night I could not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the first choir, their serenity now less like death and more like communion. I understood then what we had begun, a conversation, long overdue, between the living and the memory of belief. The emperor still slept upon his throne, but the dream around him was stirring. Celine sat beside me, polishing her weapon by starlight. "If this spreads," she said, "they'll call it heresy." "Perhaps," I replied. "But maybe heresy is just the word for faith that changes." Far to the west, the horizon flickered with lightning that made no sound. I felt the new hymn rising through the ground, moving toward it, seeking every voice that had ever prayed and every silence that had never dared to. For the first time in my life, I did not know whether I feared it or loved it. The closer we drew to the inner systems, the louder the silence became. The vox channels, once a storm of orders and distress calls, began to thin. Where speech had been, only breath remained, a collective pause spreading from outpost to outpost like a held note. Reports filtered through the crackling static. Choirs breaking formation mid-mass, astropaths collapsing mid-chant. The emperor's own litany vibrating through cathedral walls with new intervals that no organist had written. Celine and I crossed the wastes aboard a battered pilgrim hauler bound for the Segmentum capital. The vessel's chapel was small, a shrine patched together from scavenged reliquaries and riveted hope. The pilgrims prayed without coordination, each whisper rising at its own pace, yet somehow their words began to weave together. No conductor led them, no priest corrected them. The sound coalesced into harmony on its own, gentle, inevitable. When I met their eyes, I saw the same quiet wonder that had filled the soldiers on the plain. They didn't understand what they were singing, only that it felt true. And in that truth was danger. The Imperium's faith had always relied on precision, on ritual that fenced divinity away from the crowd. This new song had no fences. It belonged to whoever could hear. During the voyage, dreams replaced sleep. I walked through corridors of glass where every step revealed scenes of other worlds. Miners halting their drills to hum a line. A Hive City orphan tracing the shape of a halo in soot. An astropath blindfolded in gold crying soundless tears as her mouth formed our tune. The hymn was crossing distance not by transmission, but by remembrance, as if every human soul carried a shard of the vault's memory and was now being asked to return it. One morning, the ship's intercom burst alive with overlapping voices, the astropaths of the choir deck chanting in panic. We raced to them. They stood ringed around their emperor effigy, hands clasped, eyes white. Their chorus rose to an impossible pitch. The air rippled, lights dimmed, and through the hull we glimpsed the warp, a vast aurora swirling with faint, organized patterns of sound. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. The astropaths fell silent. One whispered, "Something on Terra heard us." Celine turned to me, face pale. "If the High Lords discover this, they'll think it a corruption." "Perhaps it is," I said. "Or perhaps corruption is what faith becomes when it begins to grow." When we made landfall on the fortress moon orbiting the capital, the change was already visible. Processions in the streets sang hymns slightly off-key, yet the crowds followed, entranced. The Ecclesiarchy had declared a continent-wide vigil to reaffirm doctrine. Every cathedral bell tolled in counterpoint to every other. The air itself shimmered with overlapping resonance, as if the planet had become an enormous instrument tuning itself. We entered one of the grand cathedra, its nave crowded with thousands of kneeling faithful. At the altar stood a cardinal draped in scarlet and fear. His sermon stumbled each time the choir behind him drifted into the new harmony. He slammed his staff against the stone. "Silence! Sing only as written!" The people obeyed for a breath, and then the melody rose again, unstoppable, threading through marble and flesh alike. The cardinal's staff cracked. He dropped it and fell to his knees, not from defeat but from awe. I saw tears cut clean lines through the dust on his face. Celine leaned close. "They don't even need leaders anymore," I answered softly. "No, they need listeners." Outside, the sky darkened. A tremor ran through the atmosphere, not thunder, but the echo of the Astronomican's beacon shifting pitch for the first time in 10 millennia. Across the sector, astropaths would be hearing it. Those attuned to the Emperor's light would feel its rhythm alter, infinitesimally yet undeniably. The throne still burned, but its song was no longer solitary. Celine gripped the railing of the balcony, looking toward the spires of the Imperial Palace far across the void. "Do you think he notices?" I wanted to believe the Emperor could feel any of this, but the truth was deeper and stranger. "Maybe he always did," I said. "Maybe we're just finally quiet enough to hear him answer." A bell somewhere above the city shattered under its own resonance. The fragments fell like bright rain, chiming all the way down. Every person in the square looked up, faces uplifted, voices joining without fear. It was not rebellion. It was recognition, the universe remembering its own heart. Chapter 5. The Ember and the Throne. The city never truly slept, yet that night even its engines seemed to hold their breath. I stood on the balcony of the cathedral where the air still trembled from the broken bells. Across the horizon, the glow of Terra's shield lattice flickered like a dying heartbeat. I could feel the hymn humming beneath my ribs, patient, unending. It did not seek to rise. It waited to be answered. Celine joined me, her armor dark against the starlight. "It's everywhere now," she said. "Every world, every vox band. They're calling it the Silent Psalm." I smiled at the irony. "A song that sings through silence. The Synod will try to stop it. They'll succeed," I said. For a while. Below us, millions knelt in the streets, their candles forming rivers of light that wound through the ruins. They weren't rebelling. They were remembering. Each flame looked fragile, yet together they lit the entire city. I thought of the vault, of the canoness whose faith had learned to listen, of the sisters who had burned so the next voice could speak. The sky rippled. For an instant, all the stars dimmed except one, the pale beacon of the Astronomican. Its radiance deepened to gold, then to something I had no name for. The change lasted no longer than a breath, but every soul on Terra felt it. Some cried out in terror. Others laughed through tears. Celine gripped the railing. "Was that him?" I didn't answer. Words would have made the moment smaller. The light faded back to its familiar white, steady and remote, as if nothing had happened. Yet the afterglow lingered inside us, a warmth that refused to cool. Somewhere in the distance, choirs began to sing again, hesitant at first, then strong. Their melody was ours, reshaped by voices we would never meet. It carried through the avenues, over the walls, up toward the palace where the Emperor sat unmoving upon his throne. The hymn reached even there, threading itself between the machinery and the prayers of 1,000 custodians. Whether he heard it, no one could say. Celine turned to me. "If he never wakes, what was it all for?" I watched the candles below sway in the wind. "To learn that faith isn't a cage," I said. "It's a door we keep daring to open." We stood until dawn. The first light touched the shattered spires, turning them to glass. The hymn faded, leaving only the soft hiss of the wind across the stone. In that silence, I felt something vast and tender moving far beyond sight. Not the Emperor's hand, perhaps, but the shape of belief itself, still burning, still becoming. When Selene finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "What happens now?" I looked east, toward the mountains where the vault still slept beneath layers of ash. "Now," I said, "we listen." The sun rose. The city exhaled. The last echo of the hymn folded into the morning, neither victory nor loss. Only the sound of a universe remembering how to hope.